Hello, everybody. My name is Boswood, a.k.a. El Guapo, and it's me speaking to you with your host, Jeffrey Wilson.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, locked and loaded for another episode of It's Me Speaking to You, Jeffrey Wilson, coming to you from the gateway to the West, St. Louis, Missouri. And as I just told him a moment ago, I've got to suppress my 14-year-old Jeff for a minute because, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, I mean, this is a very special interview for me, man. As everybody knows, I'm a huge professional wrestling fan, and I didn't say sports entertainment. I said professional wrestling fan. This guy here, he's just been killing it, man. Former GFW, Global Force Wrestling heavyweight champ, former New Japan Pro Wrestling tag team champ, former TNA tag team champ, former TNA world champ, and to this moment right now is the current, the reigning, and defending, can't believe these words are about to come out of my mouth, National Wrestling Alliance heavyweight champion, Nick Aldis. How do you do, sir?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Jeffrey. I'm good. Thank you.
Again, man, thank you very much for taking the time. I've had, several conversations with, just legends of the day, your Kamalas, your Hacksaw Jim Duggans, your Eric Bischoff, and I always ask them, and it's always very fascinating to me, and I'll ask you the same question, my man. When did the professional wrestling bug bite you?
That's an interesting question. I have a sort of interesting kind of pathway to wrestling, I think, as a fan, because I obviously grew up in England, and in the UK, the WWF was by far and away the market leader. I mean, they're brand wise, they had achieved what they ultimately would achieve worldwide. I feel like they achieved that in the UK and in Europe almost before they achieved it, in the United States in some respects, because in the US there was this very sort of a geographical kind of affection, to the NWA and to, Jim Crockett Promotions. And because some of these territories had been so successful and so prominent in such a big part of the fabric of culture of these different areas of the United States, which is such a big and diverse country.
Sure.
It was, the WWE would eventually obviously achieve, what they wanted, which was to become the name. Like, they would be the industry. They would become the industry.
Yeah.
But I feel like they had already achieved that in the UK, by the 90s, which was when I was first sort of really exposed to it. But the interesting part of it for me was I remember as a kid knowing who all the WWF wrestlers were, but I never watched it. Like, we didn't have satellite TV when I was a kid, and I'm not gonna pull out my violin and pretend that I came from a sort of meager background, or that my parents worked hard and I had a sort of nice middle class upbringing, and we didn't have satellite TV because my parents didn't want us to get distracted. They wanted us to be educated and and to play sports and go outside and and do things. They didn't want us to be. They just didn't. To them, the idea of needing more than 4 or 5 channels was completely, luxurious and unnecessary.
For sure.
So I never really saw it, but because of, and this again speaks to the quality of WWE's marketing and licensing and merchandising.
Sure. Yes.
I was so familiar with the WWF branding, the wrestlers, the stars, and even really the gimmicks, the characters, because of the merchandise, with the action figures, the video games, the annuals. Like I had all the annuals.
So what time are we talking about? Everybody kind of the Attitude Era, etc. Who are you talking about?
Early 90s.
Okay.
Like I remember there was an Ultimate Warrior sticker that was the bane of my mother's life, because it came with like some bubble gum or something, and I stuck it to like one of the kitchen cabinets, and like she could not get it off. Like the Ultimate Warrior lived on our kitchen cabinet for about 3 or 4 years before he finally sort of when they sort of steamed it off or something. She's like, I've had enough of this, but so that just sort of shows like the power of their presence and stuff. But for me, my first heroes in wrestling were Bret the Hitman Hart and Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog.
Okay.
Obviously, it shouldn't really come as any surprise that when you think about, Wembley Stadium, it was 1992 and I was born in 1986. So, I was a 6-year-old kid, you know what I mean? And so,
right.
At that point, I thought Bret the Hitman Hart was the coolest guy in the world. Like, I remember seeing Hulk Hogan, and I knew he was a big deal. I knew he was a big star, but I'm no one to talk because I got a receding hairline. I've had a receding hairline my whole adult life, but like, he was bald. It's a silly thing to say, but when I was a kid, I just was kind of like, he's bald and has a mustache, like my dad. My dad is bald and has a mustache. Like I remember, like, I was a big fan of Jake the Snake Roberts,
for sure,
predominantly because he looked like my dad. Which was funny because my dad, like, if you look at my dad facially looks a lot like Jake, but for me, like, when I was that age, when I was sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, the people I pretended to be when I was make believe in my room was like either Leonardo from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Bret the Hitman Hart.
Right.
Like, those were the because I saw him as that sort of character. Like, he was just like the long hair and the leather jacket and the sunglasses, and I just thought he was the coolest guy. So I was sort of privy to it, but then it wasn't until the formulaic days of the Attitude Era was when, like, some friends of mine at school were like, that was when it was really starting to just hit, like, pop culture. Like, and I just remember my buddy Eddie at school saying, like, do you watch wrestling? And I was like, not really. Like I said, I know it. I thought I liked it when I was a kid, sort of thing. And but sort of here and there. And he's like, have you seen it recently? It's crazy. He's like, you've got to watch this, like, Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker and Hell in a Cell. Like, and that was, and so then he had VHS tapes that he'd taped of all the Raws leading up to the Hell in a Cell, and like that pretty much that Shawn and Undertaker angle for the first Hell in a Cell. And then that Hell in a Cell match, like, that was, I just remember just being like, whoa, what is this? And then I went back and kind of retraced all of 1997, which was, to me, still one of the greatest years in wrestling history. Like, just the Bret Hart, like, Bret Hart character, like the evolution of the Bret Hart character over 1997, and then the Shawn Michaels character and the Undertaker, and then Steve Austin, like, blooming into, like, what would become the biggest star in the industry.
Yes.
It was just such cool. Like, there was so much energy. Like, even when you go back and watch it now, you can just feel like everybody knows that, like, there's something happening here. And
were you strictly WWE at the time, or did you dabble into some WCW?
I know that was the interesting thing, was that, to me, I remember seeing every now and then, like I said, when wrestling, because in that period wrestling just was everywhere. It was part of pop culture. But in the UK, it was the WWF, and I remember some of my friends, like it was interesting because, when I look back on a lot of this now, and I look at it with an analytical eye, because obviously I look at things as a talent, but also as a sort of behind the scenes and producer sort of role as well. Sure. So I sort of, analyzing it now, I find it very interesting because I try to learn from it, because I remember when I was, I was probably like 14, 13, maybe even like younger than that, like 12 or 13 was I guess I would have been like around the birth of the Attitude Era. But I remember eventually some of my brother's friends, who were a couple of years older than me, then kind of talking about the NWO and WCW and Hollywood Hogan and stuff. And I remember looking at these things again, like, Hollywood Hogan, like, what? Like, and kind of thinking, why is Hulk Hogan you know what I mean? Like, I didn't get it at first.
Right.
And then by the time we got to me, WrestleMania 15 was the height of my pure fandom, in the sense of, at that point, I was still just 100% like invested in who I wanted to win and what I thought was cool and everything else. Like, WrestleMania 15, The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin was just, to me, I was just like, nothing's going to stop me from seeing this.
Right.
And then by the time you got to the key one for me, as far as the penny dropping, that I didn't just want to watch this, I wanted to do this, was Backlash 2000, Rock and Triple H. Wow. That whole period, to me, Triple H was so untouchable. From all that first part of 2000, like his match with Mick Foley at Madison Square Garden at the Royal Rumble was a masterpiece, and he had so much heat. Everything they did, just between, like, after working with Mick and then going on, and then the way they set it all up, where it was like The Rock's the man, eventually these two are going to lock horns, and then that match at Backlash with just all the shenanigans and the McMahons, and then Austin came back. I was just like, by that point, I remember just kind of having this epiphany, like, I'm not going to be satisfied just being a fan of this. I want to do this.
Wow. Well, and you've definitely done it, man. So, and then obviously fast forward a little bit, and for me personally, we're going to get into this and some of the legends you've had a chance to meet and talk to. I don't know what it is, man, but I've been on this serious Harley race bender lately, and just watching old school Harley race matches, because every other Haley's comment, I will watch WWE just because like I told you off air a little bit, I'm super old school, and what they're doing now, it is entertaining, I guess, to some degree, but it's just such a far cry from what I was raised on, and I know kayfabe is supposedly dead, et cetera, but you wound up linking up with Harley, MLW Wrestling. Tell me about how you got started down there at MLW. Or not MLW, I'm sorry. Yeah. Harley race is cool.
Yes. Well, so once I had made that, once I'd sort of made that decision, I'm quite single-minded at that. Once it had sort of dropped, like, okay, I want to be a pro wrestler, like, I want to be in the wrestling business. That's when I just became such a student of the game. Like, that's when I suddenly understood what WCW was all about, and I went back, and and I would go. I'm really dating myself now, but I would go to my mom was a library manager, so I would go to the library where she worked, because sometimes I would have to go there after school and wait for her anyway and stuff like that. So I would go there and would get, you could rent VHS tapes from or you could borrow them from the library, and they were having a big clear out one day, and fortunately for me, someone had obviously donated just a absolute boatload of old WWF and WCW VHS tapes. So I just took them all, but piecing all that together, I kind of got, I suddenly, I was just brushing up on everything, like, all the way from, like, Hogan and Andre, and then, and then all the way up through WCW, and then later on, sort of understanding the history of the NWA, and like how that, and then how that sort of went national with sort of Jim Crockett Promotions, and then WCW and all the rest of it. And I suddenly, like, somewhere, I loved Ric Flair. I was a huge fan of Flair. I just remember right from the beginning seeing Flair, even when he was in the WWF, like, for his, that first run, the brief run. I remember just being like, this guy's nuts, like, you sort of knew that you would, he just has that thing, he just has that ability to just draw you in with his promos. But I remember then I remember going back and then seeing kind of Flair in his prime, to me, like, 89 Flair and Steamboat is still to this day, just untouchable.
I find that interesting that Rick Steamboat has been in matches, between the one with Macho Man and the series with Ric Flair. Mm-hmm. Like, Ricky Steamboat has been in some of the dopest matches in the history of professional wrestling.
Oh, without question, because he's the, in terms of the in-ring, he's the ultimate babyface performer. In the classic sense of the word, before fans became so cynical and so
smarts,
hijacky, and before they became so snarky and hijacky and stuff, Ricky Steamboat was the ultimate baby. You know what I mean? Because he was a great looking, great body, exotic, like hugely talented, smooth as silk, like, but was you could tell he was a genuinely nice guy. He had a little bit of that humility to him and was a family man. So there was, it was the ultimate good guy. And, it just worked so well against, he was, this is an interesting point for any young wrestlers that listen to this, is that I always tried to look at why things worked and why things succeeded. And, you could make the argument, oh, well, Ricky Steamboat, he didn't have a ton of charisma, he wasn't a great talker and stuff. But he was in a period where everybody was a walk and talk guy. Everybody, you talk about his match with Steamboat, with Savage. Randy Savage is about as extrovert as you can get from everything from his presentation to his promos to everything, right? So it was a perfect contrast. Like this business is about, styles make fights. Is what they always say in boxing and MMA. And it's the same in pro wrestling. Like, I get so irritated when I see these shows where they go, oh, dream match, and it's like the best high-flying guy against the other best high-flying guy.
Yeah.
And it's like,
cancels itself out. Yeah.
So like that's cool every now and then, but like, people will contact us for NWA title matches, and a lot of the time, they'll sort of go, don't worry, I'm old school. I'll make sure I match you up with like another guy your size and like a true heavyweight and this and that. And I'm sort of going, that is not my concern.
Right.
Like, my concern is if it's going to draw money, like, is if the guy's going to be good and going to be
good for business,
going to hold up his end of the deal and be a good like the best thing for me are the contrast to me, for sure. Like, and then every now and then you get someone where the parallels are there, like me and Cody, and you get because over a period of time, then people see the paths kind of starting to meet, and they go, oh wow, they're on a collision course. Right. That's when that stuff works, not just for no reason, But the point I was getting to was that, like, I then sort of really became familiar with all that stuff, and that's when I really started to understand the difference, as far as like, okay, so the WWF was very like aimed at kids and very sort of cartoony and stuff, and very like, it was all about the moments, which is a very, very important thing to to have in this business, because I always say to people, if people ask me about matches and I always say, people remember moments in this business. They don't remember spots, and they don't remember matches. Yes. They remember moments.
Yes.
They remember The Rock and Hulk Hogan standing there with with people going nuts without them even touching. They remember, they remember the beer truck. They remember Hogan slamming Andre. They remember these things. And unfortunately for me, I've had one case now where it's like, where people can point to, Cody and I standing in the ring in Chicago with that place on their feet before we even touched. And like, that's a moment, and that will be forever. Like, until I do something else that matches that, that's my legacy.
Well, and even some of what Billy has said, leading, even just the bringing the NWA back, there's been so much kind of obviously behind the scenes thought process that has gone into each moment leading up to even just you and Cody, standing in the ring. It's just all of these different elements. It's just a beautiful thing, because for me personally, I remember back in the day, I wasn't around, but Johnny Valentine saying, I can't make you think that wrestling's real, but I could definitely make you think that I'm real. And so kind of that psychological aspect has been missing. And that's why I just love the fact that Billy has brought this back and brought the NWA and that style back to wrestling. Going back to almost Ricky Steamboat, this just popped in my mind. I don't know if you know this or not, but back in the day when I think the spot in Mid-Atlantic Wrestling when Ricky Steamboat ripped the clothes off of Ric Flair, vice versa, and they rubbed Ricky's face into the cement. And then they cover his head up and go in the back, and Harley Race says, yo, whoever, go to True Value and get the biggest grade, whatever that's called, sandpaper, and they sanded Ricky's face down, you know what I mean, to take those pictures that are iconic today. That's commitment to this business, man. That's what you had back in the day. Such a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's really a simple formula, is you take reality and then you manipulate it to make it more entertaining. That's, to me, is the essence of what makes a good pro wrestling angle. You take my angle with Cody as a perfect example. Is that we didn't have to create anything.
Right.
Cody, hey, get out of here. Sorry.
That's all right.
Got to run in as usual.
Run in. Wait a minute.
Here comes Donovan.
Luke comes Gordon's golden sword. Like, wait a minute. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Cody genuinely is the son of the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Yes. Yeah.
He genuinely does have memories of watching his dad with the, with that belt and you know what I mean? And like understanding how important it is to him and stuff like that. And there's no denying it.
Right.
So no one's sitting there going, groan, like this is like gratuitous, like written Hollywood nonsense. Like they know it's real. Yeah. And then for me to stand there and go, oh, okay, because I'm the one who's busted my ass to get everyone to care about the NWA World's title again. And now this guy thinks just because he's Dusty Rhodes' son, he thinks he can just come and like book himself in a match and take it from me. And everyone went, oh, damn. Like that's real too. Yeah. And it was like, it ain't rocket science, like you just have to, you have to promote. I believe the best promoting in wrestling and booking, you promote it the same way that you promote real fights. That you promote boxing or MMA. You find the guys that are like naturally on a collision course, and then you match them up, and then you sort of, it's just the match in the ring that is different in terms of what's real and what's not.
Well, and like to quote Anthony Robbins, success leaves clues. I mean, you guys are basically just kind of following the formula of basically what works. What we've seen.
I'm a huge Tony Robbins guy, so you're already speaking my language.
Absolutely. And I kind of jumped the gun, and I wanted to kind of discuss. I mean, I got how the wrestling bug bit you, and you have been in the game for a minute, man. This is almost what I love the story arc. There's no overnight successes. You Stone Cold going back to when he's stunning Steve, or the Ringmaster, or Rock when he's Rocky Maivia or whatever. It very rarely works. And you had your kind of incarnations of Brutus, Magna, or something to that. And so I know, but I mean, you found your true bliss in your true juice in being yourself. And there are just so many wrestlers, from Arn Anderson and so many other people who I've heard on shoot interviews just say, when you are able to just be yourself, that's the best quote unquote character, because it's you.
Right. Well, and because it's not like acting where people go, okay, I'm going to accept like Denzel Washington as this person in this film, like for this short period of time. Like you have to get the audience to invest in you for many, many years. And, the only way to me, I think the only way to do that and for it to work over a long period of time is to be authentic. If you're constantly saying someone else's words and, and acting in a way someone else has designed for you, and, and there's no part of you in there, eventually that's going to come through, and subconsciously the audience are going to see it.
Yep.
No matter how good you are in the ring.
Without a doubt. And it always, for me, I mean, it always is so transparent. And it goes back to that NWA stuff. It's like you very rarely, later on down the line in WCW, you saw, ding-dongs and some crap like that. But, your Jim Crockett Promotions, your Mid-Atlantic, you did not see a lot of gimmick guys. You saw people who were, Dusty Rhodes the Cowboy. Right. I mean, that was kind of essentially themselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because the one of the things I realized going back was that the first time I was exposed to that product, I didn't really like it. I was a kid, and to me, the WWF was cool, and Bret Hart and these big characters, and they were they're huge muscles, and they were like perfect gimmicks, and these larger than life presentation and costumes and flashing lights and everything. And I saw the NWA, and it was like, it was a little bit rough around the edges, and it was a little bit like sometimes the production left a little tired, and and they would sort of, sometimes it would be things like, it would be a little stuffy and a bit kind of smoky, and you'd think like, and as a kid, I remember thinking like, oh, this is lame, but then as I got older, I go back and I watch it and I go, man, this is so raw. You know what I mean? This is so like,
yeah, that was part of the charm of it for me growing up watching it. I mean, it was those kind of like old school wrestling at the Chase, smoke filled rooms, and go ahead. I'm sorry.
To me, the thing that hooked me on wrestling before anything else was the fact that there was, at the Attitude Era, there was 15,000 people in Berlin going nuts. I mean, just going nuts, and singing along with like Road Dogg's entrance and singing along with The Rock, and like, everybody knew everyone's stuff. And I was just like, that's the coolest job ever,
Right.
But when later on, again, going back to matches like Flair and Steamboat, or like Flair and Dusty, or Magnum TA and, and Tully Blanchard and people like that, it was like, you could hear like the raw emotion in the audience. Like they would genuinely like, I want this guy to beat this other guy's ass. Like that, that was, and or like my favorite, or like, when girls would scream because Ricky Morton was getting his ass kicked. They were genuine.
Selling like Ricky Morton, baby. Selling like Ricky Morton.
Right. And they were so worried about him, and that's something that you have to, to me, you have to really be an adult to appreciate what that, all of that. So as a kid, I was kind of like, these guys taking this silly wrestling a bit seriously. But then as an adult, I went, wow, like, this just, they've got them. The hook is set. So,
I mean, to the point where that line still persists in professional wrestling, selling like Ricky Morton. I mean, and it's going back to Magnum TA, dude. That was my guy, dude. Magnum TA and the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez. Shout out to Manny Fernandez. I actually got to meet him, have a couple beers with him after some matches. But Magnum, who I'm still trying to get on the show, like that was my guy. And when that wreck happened, that absolutely devastated me. As long with most people in the wrestling world, that story still goes down as like the biggest what ifs and sad stories. But one of the things that hooked me, man, I think they were Philadelphia or something. Magnum was wearing like a white button-up shirt, and he's talking, and Ole and Arn jumped him in the back, and Dusty couldn't. They were tag team partners. Dusty couldn't find him, and Magnum comes crawling to the ring. I mean, it was just the angles they would do back in the day, and just the way they just made it so real was just. I loved it, man. Loved it.
Right. And what we've tried to do in the modern era is not recreate that, but look at what that presented to people in contrast to what the WWF was presenting.
For sure.
Tully, I was saying on the Flair documentary for ESPN, he said, our product was male, blue collar, guys want to see a fight. Their product was kids. Well, when you have kids, mom and dad have to bring them. So it was kind of like, he was kind of explaining how they, commercially wise, they had the smarter strategy. But, at the same time, once they've got that market locked up, your best bet is probably to double down on an alternative, and we said, when Billy first called me, well, first Dave Lagana called me and then Billy, but because Dave Lagana and I had more of a relationship, and we've worked together in TNA, and he knew what I had to offer and knew that I hadn't really scratched the surface yet,
Right.
And even as TNA world champion and stuff, I was very hamstrung, in that during that run. So he calls me and says, "What are you doing? Like, why are you not in WWE?" And I said, "Dave, if I knew the answer to that question, things would be a lot easier, but I don't, so it's like, whatever."
I was going to ask you that, actually.
Right. Well, if I had $1 for every time I've been asked, I would never have to wrestle again. It is what it is. But I just said, you know what, Dave, I'm pretty disenchanted with the business because there's nowhere else to go. Impact is dwindled down to next to nothing. Ring of Honor is, at the time I thought, was not really the best fit for me. And, I just sort of saw the way the business was going, and I said, God, all everyone cares about is the match in the ring. You know what I mean? It's all just epic match, spot, spot, spot. This is awesome. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And I sort of went like, that's not what I got into this business for, and I started going like, I think I'm going to start thinking about getting out because it's just not, there's nowhere, if it, without, until there's a product where I can actually, really do what I thought was the essence really of what pro wrestling is. It's kind of, what's the point?
And when was this? Was this towards your last run with TNA?
No, this was in 2017.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So this was the summer of 17, and they called me, and I had seen the news. Like, I had seen the headline, like, that Billy had bought the NWA, and I remember just thinking, okay, like, I wonder why he's done that. You know, I thought maybe he was doing it to... I thought maybe he was doing it to do some sort of merchandise thing, or, you know, maybe to do some, like, kind of touring, you know, Q&A thing with, like, the legends, or, you know what I mean? Something like that, some sort of nostalgia. You know, some sort of nostalgia.
Because the NWA did have a couple different incarnations with TNA, ending with the, you know, obviously career suicide moment, in my opinion, August 24th, 1994, Shane Douglas on the corner of Swanson and Rittner, when he, you know, labeled all the guys who've made the NWA what it is and then totally shat on them until they can kiss my ass. Like, that still ruffles people's feathers to this day. Sure.
And you know, it achieved something for Paul Heyman.
For sure.
but maybe Shane, I don't know. You know, you'd have to ask Shane about it. I'm sure he does. You know, you can't live your life with regret, but yes, it was, you know, perhaps
didn't work out well for him. Did not work out.
There's always going to be people who remember that, you know, but but so then, you know, I basically just sort of explained where I'm at and what, and why I hadn't really been very active. And Dave basically says, well, because Billy's bought the NWA, and I left TNA and I went with him, and he sort of explained a little bit about the last bit of the sort of very murky, dirty sort of situation with Billy and TNA and the money and, you know, and all the rest of it. And he basically said, I just felt like Billy was the guy who was putting his money where his mouth is, and he got shafted, so I decided to leave and go with him. And now we're doing this, and they sort of explained what he wanted to do with it. And I said, all right, well, keep me posted.
Did you know what he was going to do with it before you went with him? Because I know he has strategized this whole process. Did you guys have that talk before you went with him, or was this kind of afterwards, kind of secondary?
So Dave lays out sort of their cultural mission statement, if you like, you know, kind of what they want to achieve with it, and you know, and basically saying, like, we just need someone who wants to be committed to it, you know, fully, and, you know, and someone who represents what Billy thinks, you know, is what, you know, what kind of drew him to wrestling, which was, you know, guys with size, you know, rugged, masculine, do you know what I mean? Like someone who, you know, like an athlete, right? And I said, all right, you know, step into my office. You know, we're going into it. And I got off the phone with Dave, and 2 minutes later my phone went off again, and it was Billy. And then he then went into great detail, because we had met a little bit. We overlapped at the very end of my TNA run, was at the very beginning of his. So and you know, he laid out what he goes, he basically said, I'm kind of a little tired of seeing two guys who look like my next door neighbor doing gymnastics, and, you know, and that's not a knock on anyone or anything, or what you like or don't like or anything, but he said, like, there's a place for it, but I just wish that it wasn't everywhere, you know. And he said, like, what happened to, you know, men, you know, fighting for a prize? And I said, I don't know, but I'd love to find out, you know.
Right. And making that real, that real. That's a huge part. I mean, the thing with belts now, they just trade hands left and right, and they make it mean so little. And that's why, honestly, I mean, whatever. I obviously love the new NWA, but I'm a huge MMA fan. I love Countdown. I love these kind of behind-the-scenes thing that you guys are doing. Right. The 20 pounds of gold is just absolutely gold, no pun intended. And that's what helps sell a lot of this, I think.
Well, yes, and that was kind of that was, you know,
10 pounds of gold. I'm sorry.
Historically, I would say that's probably my best contribution, I suppose, in the sense of, I'm not suggesting that it was solely my idea, but I do distinctly remember saying from the beginning, look, if we try to compete in the space by just setting up a ring, getting a bunch of wrestlers, putting on a bunch of matches, and just putting it under an NWA logo, it's not gonna get the job done. There's so much wrestling now. You can watch it on any device, any day of the week. You can watch really good wrestling. You know, NXT, New Japan, Ring of Honor, the WWE Network. You know, you can watch classic stuff.
Yep.
You know, and even the sort of higher tier independent promotions. There's just you know, and half of them are the same guys.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's kind of like I don't know how we're gonna penetrate the market in that space. I said, I don't know about you guys, but I'm gonna watch Conor McGregor fight Floyd Mayweather, you know, and what for, you know, for no other reason other than the fact that it's a spectacle,
right?
And because of how they've built it, but also because I don't know when I'm next going to get to see either of them fight, you know, and I want to see it now based on all this build-up.
Yep.
The same, and then a few weeks after that was the first Canelo Triple G fight, which was phenomenal.
Yep.
And I was a huge Triple G fan, and I still am, and I'm a Canelo fan too, but Triple G is my guy.
Right.
And I was like, and I was showing this stuff to him, and then going like, I don't buy every UFC pay-per-view, but I buy the ones with George St. Pierre, or I buy the ones with Brock Lesnar, you know, or buy the ones with Conor McGregor, like, or sometimes I may just get one if the embeddeds and the countdown shows and stuff are compelling enough.
Yep.
And even if I don't buy the pay-per-view, I'll still watch the embeddeds and I'll still watch the countdowns.
Yep.
Because it's beautifully produced. It's compelling content.
Absolutely.
And I said, that's gonna make our guys stars without them having to take as many bumps.
And that's,
you know,
that's a huge part of it too. I mean, you not just humanize, but you sell these guys, like I said, without it always being just about the match. And honestly, I mean, you're a smart guy. You know all this. I mean, this goes back to Aristotle, the Aristotelian plot curve. You know, rising action, climax, falling action. The formula's been there. It's just a matter of how you implement it. And like Billy said and you just said it, we're not trying to just recreate the old school NWA. You just can't do it. And it's right. I find it very fascinating, bro, because like I told you off air, I had a conversation with Eric Bischoff, and if you go back to the rise and fall of WCW, that documentary on the WWE Network, at the end they said something about how cheap they bought Vince bought WWE for, and Jericho was like, I would have bought it if I'd known it was that cheap. But at that time, he would not have been able to monetize it because something called internet and streaming hadn't come in yet. So now you guys are able to do what you're doing without TV packages. Now you're on Fight TV. Now you're streaming. Everything is streaming and handheld, like you just said. And so now you guys are taking advantage of 2019 tech while still bridging the gap between old school wrestling.
Well, and we're also not completely overspending,
which is huge. Like you said, arenas, matches, rosters, like that's huge overhead.
Producing television is hugely expensive, and you know, especially, and then you know, producing live television is a whole other ball game, and that was really ultimately the beginning of the end of TNA. Was going, we're going to go live, brother.
Yeah,
you know. It's just spent so much money, you know, and it's just there's only so much you can spend before there's nothing left to spend, and the returns were not there. But you know, we get this all the time. You know, what is the NWA? When are you guys going to get a TV deal? And what is a TV deal now? You know, like you're commenting on a YouTube video to ask that, but you're watching TV. You're watching
exactly.
You know, like our model currently in the current climate, we have, you know, there's I think we've got 3 guys under contract, you know, in terms of talent.
Sure.
Right? Me, Willie Mack, the national champion, myself, and Camille, my insurance policy. Right. So, you know, in the midst of it, but clearly, you know, until Willie was introduced Willie won the national title at our first pay-per-view event and stuff like that. But, you know, the nuts and bolts of our operation has obviously been the world title, you know, and some of that happened organically, and some of that, you know, obviously it was always going to be the focus. That's why the show's called 10 Pounds of Gold, and you know, our first you know, program was with Tim Storm, and again, that's a testament to Dave Lagana's, you know, ability and creativity, and Billy's vision and trust of Dave. But you know, we saw. You know, here's this guy, Tim Storm, the wonderful human being, just a great, rugged a man's man, and had never really achieved a great deal of success in the business, but had been happily working the independent circuit in the Texas and surrounding area. To him, being the NWA champion meant so much to him, even though he knew in his heart that obviously the belt did not carry the same cachet that it once did. But to him, as a fan and as a purist, as someone who loved the business, it was his mountaintop.
For sure.
So again, it was genuine. It was genuine. It was authentic.
And you could feel it too. I mean, like he was very real. He's like, I know I have more in my rearview mirror than out the windshield, and I get it. And you could just tell it was palpable how much he knew. I love this view from the mountaintop. And he's not the youngest guy in the world, but he still looked great. He's 54 years old. I mean, heck, Lou Thez fought his last match and won the title for the 6th time in 1963 at 46 years old. So I mean, it's not unheard of that this can happen. But I mean, you could just tell Tim Storm. I mean, he's genuine.
Well, and herein lied he plays, whatever we continue on to, whatever our level continues to be, and goes on to be in the lifespan of the current administration NWA. A huge amount of it is owed to Tim Storm, because what we had in Tim was the opportunity to present exactly what we're all about without having the asterisks next to it of, well, they just used someone hot, like they just used they went with the Billy could have very easily just said, hey, I own the NWA now, just send me the belt back, no harm, no foul, you know what I mean, and just started again and done a tournament, and Cody could have won it. You know what I mean? They could have done Cody, right? They could have.
Oh, right from the beginning. No way. That wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm saying many, but you could conceive a lot of people doing that. You know what I mean?
For
like
sure.
A lot of people would have taken that approach, like, oh, we need to get a big name. We need to do it. Like, we need to get someone hot. Blah, blah, blah. And what they did was they called me and they laid it out to me, and they said, we like this guy. Like, obviously. He's not really box office, and he ain't Steamboat in the ring, but he's believable and rugged and raw boned, and Billy likes that. And they said, you gotta see this guy. You gotta meet him, you gotta hear him talk and all that. And I heard him speak, and I saw that, and I went, yep, I get it, 100%.
And you believed it, like you said. Like you created a contest for a trophy that people actually believed. You hear Storm's story. I mean, it's very compelling. As an old school guy, it's like, I love that dude.
And nobody expected him to win. When I finally challenged him for the title, because we built it up so much, they went, okay, here it comes. Now Nick Aldis will win the title, and that's who they're going with. Because even like Dave Meltzer had already even sort of put it out there. Like
Meltzer.
Yeah, he's going to go with they're going to go with Nick Aldis, which is it's a good choice. Whatever. It's a fine choice. Whatever. He's a good promo, and he'll be a decent NWA champ. You know what I mean? Like he'd already laid it out before it happened, and then Tim beat me on the first attempt.
Right.
And everyone kind of went, wait, what? And then. By the time I did defeat him for the title, people were like, "No, like not Tim Storm." They've had this genuine sympathy for him. They were like, "Oh man," and like,
which made it that much more compelling. You losing the first time and Tim winning made the second match that much more compelling.
Yeah, and the way I beat him the second time was, I didn't cheat, but it wasn't exactly ethical. Like he had broken ribs, he had injured ribs, and like. We surprised him with it, and it, you know what I mean, and it was, and the match ended up being very one-sided, which was kind of like, which again is very unusual in day and age,
right.
Like to just have everyone kind of went, I remember even the commentators just going like, wait, what, like because I just pinned him, and what we did was by the initial Tim Storm Nick Aldis, rivalry, set the tone for how we were going to be different, and said, we're gonna present you this like a sport,
without a doubt. And it's again reminiscent of the old school Flair Harley Race, Flair Steamboat, Flair Dusty. I mean, these rivalries are actually, so huge. And like you said, you and Cody, I know I don't want to keep you too much longer. I do have a couple more things to ask you. Obviously, the huge thing you guys did with All In, selling out at Chicago, the Sears Center in a half hour, 29 minutes, man. When I heard that, I was just, again, man, I'm old school, and I stopped watching wrestling for a while, and there was a window there. And this is the cyclical nature of wrestling, period, as you know. It goes up and it goes down. You guys are now capitalizing on all these people like my age and even newer cats who are really longing for choices, for options. Here in St. Louis, I mean, obviously this is the former capital of the NWA, Sam Muchnick, et cetera. We have a lot of great independent wrestling here. And when I talked to Herb Simmons and Larry Madisick not so long ago, I asked them, with this window here of not everybody can go to the WWE. Is it a possibility that we could see a resurgence of, for lack of a better term, territories? And that's kind of what you guys are doing. You're taking the belt. You're not so much a promotion, bunch of people under contract. You're taking the champ, and going to different spots in the country, in the world, to defend against the best there. I mean, that's the territory system to me.
Yeah, and again, that did kind of happen organically because I had about 25 to 30 bookings in the books at the time where I won the championship, and within 3 or 4 days of, maybe less, maybe 2 or 3 days, within 2 or 3 days of winning the title, every single one of them had contacted me and said, "Can we make it an NWA title match now? You're the NWA. Can we? Is it possible to make it a world title match?" And at first, we weren't really sure what we were going to do with that. We would because we had discussed, obviously, the idea of making it more of a special attraction and kind of building up to it and stuff. And then, so we hadn't really decided yet, And I just said, "There's no way." Because like if I go to all these shows with the, with the title, but I don't defend it, like everyone's going to fart on it, like that's just not. They're not. I said I'm going to go everywhere. I said, "What's more NWA than that?"
Exactly.
I said I already had, as it happened. I just happened to have Australia already in the books, and a bunch of shows in the UK, and obviously shows here in the States. And then China came along. So suddenly we were in a situation where we could go, I'm going to defend this title on 4 different continents, in the space of like 8 months or something.
That's awesome.
And suddenly people started commenting like, "Oh man, this is so cool. It's like the old days, like the traveling champion and stuff."
Yeah.
And that just sort of happened that way. But then we sort of realized that we had stumbled on something that was, again, a modern interpretation of the classic,
for sure,
situation, which was like, because now there's so many of these people love to say, oh, like there's this ICW in Scotland who are crazy, you ought to see these guys, and then there's like Rev Pro in the UK, or there's there's different promotions that are really great in the UK, and then there's like these Australian promotions that are doing well, and then there's House of Hardcore in Philadelphia, and there's all these different places, and it's like, oh, that's cool, like that this guy is the world champion, and sometimes he's defending it at a traditional kind of wrestling show, but then sometimes he's defending it at like a very kind of internet savvy sort of hipster sort of wrestling show, and then sometimes he's defending it at a hardcore, and so it was kind of like, again, it was just the diversity was what made it stand out.
I mean, it's fantastic that it could even happen in the first place. Because, again, speaking to the late, great Larry Madisick, the voice of Wrestling at the Chase, R.I.P., Larry, and my boy Herb Simmons, they just were saying that it couldn't happen because every territory is so territorial. They don't want to put the NWA champ shine over their whatever name of their promotion shine. And that's why I think it's so cool for you guys to be dusting off this formula, which we know has worked before, and are implementing it in 2019. So another aspect of this, and this is so cool, man, from the National Heavyweight Championship belt looking like the old school belt. You obviously have the old school belt. talk to me about what's coming up here. The Crockett Cup, man. The Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup was the hugest tag team tournament back in the day. And, Billy and all of his, huge wisdom is dusting that off. You're going to have cats not in the competition, but people, Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, had Ricky Morton on the show not too long ago, Magnum TA, Nikita Koloff, the Midnight Express, both versions, Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton, as well as Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, along with Jim Cornette. Just genius stroke as far as marketing promotion move. Talk to me about the Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup, sir.
Well, I love tag team wrestling. Obviously a big chunk of my career was in the tag team division, with first with Doug Williams and then with Samoa Joe. Yep. And and then Doug and I even tagged a lot, after, like, on the independents. We sort of a lot of places in the UK would then booked us to sort of reform the British Invasion. So we almost had like a sort of secondary run. We even did some stuff in Germany and stuff like that. To me, tag team wrestling is, when it's done right, is a beautiful art form. It's so different to, it's just
another reason why I loved Jim Crockett promotion so much, because they've so many tag teams.
They were huge. They were a tag team territory, really. But
for sure,
because the dynamic was more about it had a more sporting vibe to it, because you could implement and display more things like tactics and strategy and and the stuff that people could relate to if they were football fans or something like that, because you could go, oh yeah, he's gonna run around like Arn and Tully, the stuff they would do, like they would do this, where Tully would draw the guy out of the ring and like run around the ring post, and Arn would be waiting on the ground, and there's a guy came around the ring post, Arn would take his head off, and it was like, oh man, like you can't get, that's not going to happen in anywhere except a tag match.
Yeah.
So I love tag team wrestling, and Dave and Billy, obviously there's always in the back of our mind of like the classic things of the NWA that we can bring back, and obviously, some things became WCW properties, so obviously they're owned by the WWE. Sure. Like Starrcade and Clash of Champions and stuff like that.
Bunkhouse Stampede.
Sure, but the Crockett Cup was something that we could do.
Well, like I said, as you being a fan of tag team wrestling, having been a champion yourself, you came in the ring with a friend of yours not too long ago with every intention of possibly entering the Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup, and your friend Marty Scurll had other plans. So how's that gonna play out, champ? Well,
it's 15 years in the making. It's again, we're not scripting anything here. This is all very real. I started training to wrestle when I was 17, and I started with the Knight family. So, Paige's mum and dad and her whole family.
Okay.
And then after a while, I decided that it was going to be beneficial for me to venture out to some other places, to keep learning different styles and from other, different schools of thought. And there was a school down near London called Dropkicks Academy that had the thing that appealed to me about it was that the training was every week, and also they had, because of its proximity to London, they had a lot of old legends would come in and be a guest trainer, so we had Steve Gray and Mal Sanders and guys like that, and then Doug Williams. That's how I first met Doug, and Doug actually was very instrumental in me sort of breaking onto the independent scene at that time, because he was the one who recommended me to a few promoters and said, there's a kid here who's got some, he's got some fundamentals, but he's got size and he's got a good physique, and he's a good athlete, like you should take a look at him. And Marty was a 16-year-old kid, and so he didn't have a driving license. And Frank, the owner of Dropkicks, pulled me aside one week and said, you live in Norfolk, which was about 3.5 hours north of where the school was. I drove like we drove 3.5 hours every week there and back. And Marty lived in Littleport, which was in Cambridgeshire, which was on the way, and Frank basically said, Frank's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Frank Reimer, his name is, and he cared so much about all the boys at that school, you know, just wanted everyone to succeed, and was just such a charitable, giving guy. And he pulled me aside and basically said, there's this kid, Martin, you know, and he's a good wrestler and blah, blah, blah. And I, you know, could you give him a lift every week? You know, and I was sort of like, oh, geez, you know, I got this dweeby kid I don't even know, and I've got to, you know, now we've got to give him a lift every week, you know. And
now I'm his Uber.
But within a couple of trips, we were inseparable.
Right.
And so, you know,
talented kid. I saw it on the 10 Pounds of Gold. Very, very talented young man.
He's killing it, and he has been killing it for a couple of years now. And I can say this with all sincerity. Everywhere I'd been, TNA and everywhere else, anytime I had an opportunity to try and get somebody in the door, it was him, always, you know. And I knew that I could just, you know, because he had the same passion for it that I had, and he had that same, you know, he just studied everything, right? And I just knew that he wasn't gonna stop until he did something. And eventually he found it, you know, in the Villain, and now he's, you know, one of the most commercially successful and valuable wrestlers in the modern era. And
wow.
So he deserves a world title shot, you know.
Well, it's really cool that you do that, man, because professional wrestling is sometimes to its benefit, is a very selfish industry. People are very much so looking out for themselves, but, you know, oftentimes, you know, it's very cool to see things like that. You saying a word to this person or doing something to help somebody facilitate their career growth, as opposed to looking at them as possibly a threat to you, or, you know what I mean?
Sure, but also, you know, what it comes down to is, you know, in the end, I knew, you know, I wanted him to make it, but this was always what I hoped for, that eventually he and I could headline a pay-per-view, you know, that we could wrestle each other in a main event match, and that people would care. And, you know, they do. Like the box office is the box office is good, and, you know, it's going to be on it's going to be on Fight, it's going to be on Honor Club, it's going to be on pay-per-view, you know. So it's like
all of you guys are killing, you know, it, man.
And to me, it's going to be it's kind of like, yeah, the Crockett Cup, you know, it's going to be this great tag team tournament with, like, you know, PCO and Brody are in it, the Briscoes are in it,
talent from all over, just like the original Crockett Cup. Talent from all over. Yes,
right. New Japan, CMLL, and you know, I'll tell you, like, there's some names that are going to be announced as far as who's actually competing in the tournament, and it's going to be great. Like, people are going to be so thrilled about some of these,
for sure,
possibilities, matchups that people thought they would never get to see, and now they're going to get to see them. And then to top it off, you've got a world title match with the two friends who have had very different paths, but have now, you know, reached their status in the industry 15 years in the making, right, for the NWA title.
So cool,
you know.
Well, I got two questions for you, man, because I know you got your little one there chiming for Daddy's attention. The pop-up events, Billy has talked about that quite a bit, and that is kind of one of the newer things you guys are implementing as far as strategies and building matches and setting up matches. Tell me a little bit about the pop-up events.
It was basically a concept that Billy had, that said, like, instead of every, you know, we needed a branding to shows that were going to be not necessarily a pay-per-view, right, that we were going to sort of really go all out with as far as, like, the streaming, you know, and you know, but we didn't want to make it where it was sort of less than, and because, you know, the way we operate, you know, is basically the pop-up, to have the most simplistic definition of it, the pop-up events are basically when we team up with an existing independent promotion, and essentially kind of take over their take over their spot for one night, take over their building, work with them, but it's an NWA Popup branded event.
Whereas, I got to link you up with Herb Simmons here in St. Louis, man.
Sure. And whereas, like, obviously with NWA 70 last year, and then with the Crockett Cup, the Crockett Cup's a co-production between the NWA and Ring of Honor, but it's an NWA show.
Sure.
And NWA 70 was an NWA show. Pop-ups are when the NWA works in conjunction with, a good independent promotion, like the first one we did was with Tried and True Promotions in Clarksville, Tennessee, and it was great. We turned people away. The place was sold out.
Wow. Continued success, man. One final question. You, sir, and you are a part of something very, very special, and I know all of you guys know this right now. As somebody who is obviously a huge fan yourself of professional wrestling, you respect professional wrestling and where it has come from. What does it mean to you, sir, to be rocking the 10 pounds of gold and inheriting this history, this legacy, and this lineage of Nature Boy Buddy Roberts, Lou Thez, Dory Funk, Harley Race, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes? Deep down, bro, and you said it online, but say it on my what does this mean to you? Because I know you take it very, very seriously. I saw you had your conversation with Dory and Harley, and you have to be that old school champ, man. You represent the NWA inside and outside the ring. What does it mean to be a part of this legacy?
It's up to this point, it's really the defining. It's going to be my legacy. It's the defining element of my career. And when you think about that, when you really put that into perspective, I was on a national cable television show in prime time on Spike TV for 6 years. And yet, historically, what I'm going to be remembered for most likely, or at least at this moment in time, if I was to retire tomorrow, what I'd be remembered for would be for being the NWA champion that helped bring the NWA title back to prominence in the modern era, and made a pretty bold statement and bold promise that I would put it back on a stage that it deserved. And within a year of saying that, Cody and I were in the middle of the ring in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't sell that house. I want to make that clear. Like that show was sold out based on the affection for those guys involved, and hats off to them. And they're going to, they're having great success.
You're referring to All In Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I would dare say that a good chunk of that pay-per-view revenue was attributed to Cody and I.
Without a doubt.
And the reaction in that building, the Ring of Honor lead announcer, his exact words were, "This is the match I believe the majority of the people came to see here tonight." And to be in that position, in that show, in that audience, with that, in that moment with Earl Hebner and everything else, that to me was, okay, you can hold this moment up against any NWA World's title match from any era. I'm not saying it's better than, but you can compare it. You can hold it up to it in terms of importance, atmosphere, passion, and interest.
And even nostalgia, man. It will go down it's etched already in the annals of history, man. You are definitely locked in with that.
And that to me is means a lot, and obviously for Dory Funk and Harley to, for lack of a better term, endorse me.
Yeah.
That's not something that you can sort of co-opt.
No, no, not at all.
And that's not something you certainly can't ask for it. You can't sort of go, "Hey, would you mind putting me over, brother?" Doesn't really work like that. And so for them to, volunteer that, because they've seen what we've offered, and they, anything in this business is always about, if you're smart, like you said before about guys being competitive with one another and not necessarily always wanting to be outshined by someone. But if you're smart in this business, you see what's working and you want to be a part of it, and you figure out, how can I be a part of it? That's what Cody did. He didn't sit there and go, you know, that they're trying to steal our oxygen. He looked at it and went, "Hey, that could be the perfect opponent for me in Chicago."
And how the universe worked serendipitously. Like, he just got, you know, released from the WWE, was pretty disgruntled there, and probably had the same sentiment of like, man, I really wish there were options, more viable options. And then he went with the Young Bucks and you and everybody, you know, and created.
Well, he was riding high with the Bullet Club by then, you know. But yes, he took a chance on himself. But
sure.
But by the time he got to that point, with All In, you know, selling out, you know, and all the rest of it, they knew they were going to sell out. You know, I don't think anyone expected them to sell out in 30 minutes, but they knew they were going to sell out. And I think that, like, but you know, he could have written his own ticket. He could have booked himself to wrestle anyone.
Absolutely.
He could have wrestled Kenny Omega. He could have wrestled whoever. He could have pulled, you know, he could have pulled someone out of retirement.
Yeah.
You know, he could have absolutely fantasy booked himself if he wanted to. And instead, he went, "Look at this."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You guys created a historical moment that still has, you know, so much room to breathe. And you guys, like, you know, Billy talking about it's in a 15, 20-year plan. I love it, man. I so love it. And honestly, man, I wish you guys all the absolute success in the world. Fortune favors the bold, man, and you guys keep being bold in your choices, and you will always have followers like me. If you can, bro, social networking, where can we track you down and see what you got going on?
So on Twitter and Facebook, my handle is @RealNickAldis, and then on Instagram, it's just @NickAldis. And yeah, you can go to nickaldis.com, which takes you to my site, which is also the Superstar Body, where you can order my book, or you can order custom-made training plans and stuff like that. And and then the NWA, you know, it's very simple on all the social media platforms. It's just @NWA.
Yeah.
And then youtube.com/NWA. And, you know, if you haven't, or, you know, I would encourage you to go and check out the 10 Pounds of Gold. If you want to pick a certain episode to kind of whet your appetite, I would suggest the All In episode or the NWA 70 episode.
They're all good, man. Honestly, I'm a huge Embedded Countdown fan. I just love the whole formula you guys have going with behind the scenes. Continued success, man. Continued blessings, peace, and love to you and your family. This has been Jay Hollywood, a.k.a. Jeffrey Wilson, speaking to the NWA heavyweight champion of the world, Nick Aldis. That just comes off the mouth, coming off the tongue real smooth, brother. Thank you so much for your time, Nick.
No, thank you.
All right. Peace and so much love, everybody. Stay tuned. There will always be more.